So this is the second Live and Learn session, and our topic is, should we kill the mentally ill? And spoiler alert, the answer to that question is no, we shouldn't. It is the worst idea in the history of bad ideas. And I think actually most Canadians would agree with us on this matter, that this is a bad idea. I think the problem is that a lot of Canadians are ignorant, and a lot of them haven't fully realized the repercussions of expanding euthanasia. And I think we have slid down this slippery slope very, very quickly. And I think a lot of people are already facing a rude awakening, and even more people are going to be facing a rude awakening. The problem is, when we're at the bottom of this slope, it's really hard for us to climb our way back up. So we need to do everything we can to slow the descent while we still can. What's interesting to reflect upon is actually Canada is already killing the mentally ill. So I just want to take us back and kind of explain our current legal situation. So euthanasia was legalized in 2016, and it was sold to the Canadian public under the auspices that it would only be available for the terminally ill, only in very extreme cases. Except in 2021, Bill C-7 passed, which removed the requirement that one's quote unquote natural death be reasonably foreseeable, whatever that means. You'll notice that I'm also using the term euthanasia. I'm not using the term medical assistance in dying or MAID, even though that's how it's commonly referred to as. It's a euphemism. And there's a lot of problems with that term. But one of the problems is that since the passage of Bill C-7, you don't actually have to be dying to be euthanized, to be killed. So to refer to it as medical assistance in dying is inappropriate when we're really talking about killing here. So if you are terminally ill, you're referred to as track 1 now. There isn't a waiting period. So if you make a request for euthanasia, you could be euthanized that very day, in theory. If you aren't terminally ill, then there is a minimum 3-month waiting period where you're assessed. You're referred to as track 2. But the stipulation is that you must have a grievous and irremediable medical condition. And in addition to, being over 18, a Canadian citizen, etc. And what that means is that you have a serious and incurable illness, disease, or disability. You are in an advanced state of irreversible decline in capability, and that illness, disease, or disability, or that state of decline causes one enduring physical or psychological suffering that is intolerable to them and that cannot be relieved under conditions that they find acceptable. So it's very subjective in terms of what is intolerable suffering to one person and what other conditions might they consider acceptable. Now, currently, there is an exclusion carved out in the Criminal Code of Canada, which says that mental illness is not considered to be an illness, disease, or disability. However, that exclusion is set to expire on March 17th, 2027. So when Bill C-7 passed in 2021, they put in this sunset clause where they said, we are going to make this, we're going to extend it to those who are mentally ill, but we acknowledge that our system is not ready to accommodate this yet. We're not quite ready. So we're going to say in 2 years, we're going to include the mentally ill as well. And then 2 years rolled around. They changed their minds in 2024. They said, okay, we're going to postpone it again and say in 2027, then those suffering solely from mental illness, they'll become eligible too. So it's not something that might happen in the future. It's already set to happen. It's already been passed in law. They've just postponed it is all. Unless we do something about it. And there is a bill that has been tabled, which would do something about it, which I will talk about later. But the important thing to understand is that it's not that if you're mentally ill, you can't be euthanized. That's not the case. It's rather that if you have a mental illness, you also need some sort of physical condition or physical disability to make you eligible for euthanasia. So what that means is that you can have two people and they might have like the same mental illness, but one person is in a wheelchair and the other person is able-bodied. And the person in a wheelchair is going to be eligible for euthanasia because they have that physical condition, that grievous and irremediable medical condition. And the person who is able-bodied is not going to be eligible for euthanasia. Even if they have the same mental illness, they have the same psychological suffering, only one is going to be killed. And that is the very unjust, discriminatory state of affairs that we have in law right now. In fact, the person who's able-bodied might very well have like much more serious, graver psychological suffering than the person in the wheelchair. It doesn't matter, because that person in the wheelchair has some sort of physical illness, disease, or disability. That means that they can be killed, whereas the able-bodied person is not. And that's really indefensible, actually. The problem is, the best way to rectify the situation is to say, actually, we're not going to kill either of you. But it seems like our country is doing the opposite and saying, okay, we recognize there's a discrepancy here. It's kind of unfair. It's not justifiable. So we're going to kill the both of you. Both of you will be eligible for euthanasia. And that is the exact opposite of what we should be doing. And so a great example of this, again, already happening, is that of Kiana Vafayan. And this has captured headlines across Canada, across the world. A lot of people really care about this story. So Kiana Vafayan was killed on December 30th, 2025. So just a couple of months ago. He was 26 years old. He left behind 4 sisters, in addition to his parents. He had type 1 diabetes, and we all know someone who has diabetes. He has type 1 diabetes, and as a result of the diabetes, he became partially blind, and he was struggling with depression, as many young people do. He had experienced substance abuse, and in 2022, he'd actually applied for euthanasia, and his mom found out about it, Margaret Marcella, and she put up a huge fight, and then the doctor backed off. But Keanu, he had his ups and downs, and he went doctor shopping, and he found Dr. Ellen Wiebe in BC, who's interestingly both an abortionist and a euthanasia doctor, and she has euthanized at least 400 people, could be over 1,000 people. This is her passion, her stated passion. And so she agreed to euthanize him. And so 26-year-old Keanu was killed. And again, because he had a physical, grievous, and irremediable medical condition, Dr. Ellen Wiebe argued that he was eligible, but undoubtedly he was struggling with mental illness. So this is what I mean by Canada is already killing the mentally ill. It's just a question of, are we also going to extend euthanasia to those suffering solely from mental illness that don't have a physical condition of any sort? And the question I think arises, do we want more stories like this one? Or do we want to avoid something like this from ever happening again? I think we want to avoid something like this from ever happening again. I think we want to avoid having victims like Keanu, because undoubtedly there will be dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of cases of other people who are struggling with their mental health who end up being killed, and more mothers like Margaret Marcella who end up losing their children to euthanasia, which is a very scary thought. So this was a pro-life syllogism that I introduced last month when I was talking about abortion. So when we're talking about abortion, we say it's wrong to kill innocent human beings. Abortion kills innocent human beings, therefore abortion is wrong. But this pro-life syllogism can also apply to euthanasia. It's wrong to kill innocent human beings. Euthanasia kills innocent human beings, therefore euthanasia is also wrong. And the way that the syllogism works is that if we accept the first two premises, then we need to accept the conclusion that euthanasia is wrong. So this is the principled argument against euthanasia. It doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter your abilities. It doesn't matter how many days you might have left. It doesn't matter if you're ill or disabled. Your life is precious. You're made in the image and likeness of God. Your life is sacred, and it is wrong to kill you. You shouldn't be playing God and deciding who lives and who dies. This is the pro-life position. And this is why we can say euthanasia is always wrong, and we're looking for a full repeal and full criminalization. Now, there are some people who are going to be able to accept that principled argument and to say we shouldn't be looking at killing as a solution ever. And there's some people who maybe we are not going to be able to convince by the principled case against it, but there are many pragmatic objections to euthanasia, and there's many pragmatic objections to extending euthanasia to those suffering solely from mental illness. One of those is that suicide prevention is incompatible with suicide promotion. So how many people have heard of Bell Let's Talk Day last month? We invest millions of dollars into suicide prevention efforts because we recognize that suicide is a social ill in society. It creates great harm in communities, in addition to harm to individuals. And again, we recognize lives as being sacred and precious, and we want to protect them. We have a national suicide prevention hotline. If anyone doesn't know the number, it's 988. That is our suicide hotline. We do everything we can to implore people to believe that their life matters and that their life is worth living. And if we want people to believe that message, we can't also say, but hey, we will help you commit suicide as well. They're fundamentally incompatible messages to say that, oh, you shouldn't kill yourself unless your suffering is really, really, really bad, in which case we will help you do so, in which case it'll be free and we'll aid you every step of the way. We will facilitate this for you. You can't possibly reconcile those two messages. A lot of what prevents someone from committing suicide is because they think about who would find my body, how would my family respond, and they don't want to do that to their family members. They're also worried of like, what if I don't succeed, and what if I just end up like severely disabled instead, or what if it's painful? Meanwhile, euthanasia promises something that's clean and sanitized, and they don't have to worry about it not being effective. And maybe incorrectly, they'll believe that it'll be painless and easy. And I think maybe even worse than that, it's that someone is affirming them in their suicidal ideation. The nature of depression and suicide, of course, is that you want to kill yourself and you're not thinking rationally. But there might be the thought of like, maybe I'm weak, or maybe I'm being selfish here. Whereas with euthanasia, there are medical professionals like Dr. Ellen Wiebe who are telling people that I agree with you. Your life is not worth living. Your life sucks. I have spent the past 3 months like assessing your situation, and I agree with you that you should give up. And so that almost gives them the peace of being like, oh, it's not even my decision. I don't even have to take responsibility for this. Someone who I should trust, a doctor, is telling me that it's okay or even good to do this. And that is so harmful, because that is the last message you should send to a suicidal person, is that actually you should go ahead with this. Because they're extremely vulnerable. They're not in a position to think rationally or to resist someone who's like, actually, you should actually consider going ahead with this. You're, again, approving someone, affirming them in a really harmful mindset that they've found themselves stuck in. We also have to consider that we have a very broken healthcare system that is overburdened. So someone who wants to be referred to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or counseling, they might find themselves waiting months or years. Whereas again, sometimes it just takes 3 months for someone to be approved for euthanasia. So we are fast tracking people to death. And even when they do get referred to a professional, it might take a few months before the counseling has an effect or before you get the right drug. It's the nature of like figuring things out. People who are struggling with mental illness, they might be stuck in a hole for a long, long time before they gradually find themselves being able to escape from that like darkness that they find themselves in. And it might be gradual, they might relapse, or it might just be a change in drugs or a change in life circumstances, and they just suddenly find themselves doing better. There's so much that we're still exploring in the science of this area. There's so many things that we're still figuring out, and it really depends on a case by case basis. You can be struggling for a while and then again improve or recover completely. There is hope for people, as Rita shared. There is hope for people. Unfortunately, so many people are not going to be able to be given that chance. And I think also the families, suicide is already really hard to deal with. That grief, that devastation, that sense of like guilt, or is there anything I could have done to prevent this, or the anger towards the person who's taken their lives. And then you complicate that by knowing not only is this a tragedy, not only did mental illness like win in this case, but the government had a role in this. Medical professionals who you should be able to trust had a role in this. And that's heartbreaking. And that's not just a tragedy anymore, but it's an injustice. I think of the case of Rose Finley, who was a quadriplegic woman with 3 young sons. And she requested euthanasia in 2023. And I'm not sure if she was sincere in that request. It might have just been to raise awareness because she was looking for disability supports, being quadriplegic. She's still alive today, thanks be to God. But I think of if she had had her request for euthanasia granted and she'd gone ahead with it, what that must be like for her 3 young boys if they were to grow up without a mother, but also they were to grow up knowing that it was their country, their government that took their mother away from them. So that brings me to my next point, which is that suicide can be a contagion. When you have suicide cases like in remote Indigenous communities, they have to be on watch that you're not going to see a copycat suicide or something like that. Because when you have these close-knit communities, it can be really hard to persevere through a tragedy like that when a community is so deeply affected by someone's suicide. And dealing with that grief over the loss of a loved one or a family member really tempts you to maybe do the same thing. If someone has a certain mental illness and you have that same mental illness and someone gets euthanized for it, then you start to ask, maybe I should do the same thing as them. It gets normalized, and we're just making this problem worse instead of better when we offer euthanasia instead. So I think about the ripple effect that this is going to cause, and it's just going to be devastating. It's going to be where like death is viewed as a default solution to people, and we're just living with this devastation and despair all around us. That is an awful country to live in. I don't know how anyone could think that this is a good idea to pursue. So we have the 2024 euthanasia stats, so the most recent stats we have available to us. And based on those stats, we can see that every year euthanasia deaths have been rising. I expect this year we will reach the milestone of 100,000 euthanasia deaths in Canada in total, which is not a milestone we ever want to reach. Over 5% of deaths now are due to euthanasia. So over 1 in 20 deaths in Canada are cases of a medical professional taking someone's life. So that's the first graph. The second graph is track 2 euthanasia deaths. So again, where a patient is not terminally ill. And again, we can see those numbers rising as well. So what we're going to see inevitably is euthanasia become normalized for those with mental illness. And even if someone is like, I have no problem with euthanasia for those suffering with mental illness, in really extreme or rare cases, well, are you okay with it, again, becoming the default, becoming common for those struggling with mental illness? Because maybe back in 2016, we could have claimed ignorance and we could say, I didn't know that it would become so popular and so rampant. But we can't claim that anymore. We can't pretend to be surprised by what's happening because we've seen the trajectory that we're on. We see headline after headline, story after story of abuse, of cases where children don't hear about their parent being euthanized until after their parent is already dead. Cases where you have to question, did this person really meet all the criteria? Was there cases of abuse? Was this person pressured or coerced into euthanasia? So again, this is where we're headed. The alarm bells are ringing. The question is, are we going to stop this train in its tracks or not? Another thing that came out of that report on medical assistance in dying based on the 2024 stats is that 116 track 2 MAID applicants withdrew their request. Praise be to God. So 116 out of the 732. So 116 in addition to the 732. So the question is, how many more might have withdrawn their requests if they had a little bit more time or a little bit more help? And we're not giving these people that time. And again, this is all going to be so much worse if we extend euthanasia to those suffering solely from mental illness. So how do we respond to people? If someone says, I think that the mentally ill should be eligible for euthanasia, just like with the question of abortion, we should form common ground. So that doesn't mean agreeing with people. That doesn't mean agreeing that abortion is okay or that euthanasia is okay. It means seeing where they're coming from and acknowledging the problem that they're trying to identify. So we're not here saying that euthanasia is bad for those suffering solely from mental illness because we think mental illness is fake, or we think it's all in someone's head, or it's no big deal and they should just get over it. We oppose euthanasia for the mentally ill while also acknowledging that mental illness can be a very heavy cross to carry, and the suffering is very real and the suffering can be very great. We're just proposing other solutions, life-affirming solutions. We don't believe that killing should be the solution, but we also recognize that mental illness is a very serious issue. And so if we start from that place of saying, hey, we agree on the problem here, we're just disagreeing on what the solution should be, but we recognize that there's a problem, then we can have a productive conversation. And so from there, just with any controversial issue like abortion where there's disagreement, it can be helpful to use an analogy, to tell a story, or to provide an example, and then to ask questions. So if, again, someone said to me that they're okay with euthanasia for the case of mental illness, I think I would make it personal. I would ask, what if it was someone you loved? What if it was someone close to you? How would you want someone responding to them? Would you want them to be affirmed in their desire to die? Or would you want someone saying, no, we believe in better for you. We are going to look at alternatives because we believe your life is valuable and we want to help you live it. And we think your life is worth living. What if you were Keanu's sister, or if you were Keanu's mom? Wouldn't you want to write a different ending to Keanu's story? So I want to draw attention to MP Tamara Jansen's Bill C-218. So if we're going to stop euthanasia from being extended to those suffering solely from mental illness on March 17th, 2027, we need to do something. We have to intervene. And I think Bill C-218 is the best way to do so, because it would remove mental illness from eligibility for euthanasia. It has been tabled. It's going to be debated very soon, likely next month in March, possibly in April. And so I urge all of you to contact your MP, to email, to call, or to post on X at them. Even if they are a Liberal or NDP MP, it's still worthwhile to contact them, because we do expect some of those MPs to vote in favor of this bill, because again, I think a lot of people are actually very uncomfortable with extending euthanasia to the mentally ill. They realize that this is a problem. And also, even if their minds aren't going to be changed, we always want to try to prick their consciences, and we always want to share the truth with them in the hope that it penetrates their hearts. And it's really easy to do so. If you go to Campaign Life Coalition's website, on the right-hand side, there's a button that says Action Alert Emails. And if you just put in your name, your postal code, your MP will automatically come up. You can refresh the screen if you don't like the pre-written message that is generated. To be honest, the content of the message doesn't really matter that much. It's just about if your MP hears from a dozen of their constituents, they're going to start paying attention to an issue. And then also, the more that they hear from their constituents, the more they're likely to vote in favor of this bill, regardless of what their personal beliefs are, because they want to be reelected. So if something seems popular, then they'll be more likely to support it. So please do contact your MP, and please encourage all of your friends and family members to do so as well. We really need to pass this bill. If you're interested in learning more, I would refer you to the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, and they also did create a 15-minute video interviewing Keanu's mom if you want to learn more about Keanu's story. So thank you very much for your attention on this topic.